When developing this lesson, I made sure that the mathematical curriculum was accessible to all students, regardless of the personal characteristics, backgrounds, and abilities. I was striving to create a lesson where the IEP and ESOL students did not feel as if they were stupid. Since we are in the 5th grade, many students keep asking why they receive special help, and it breaks my heart. I made a lesson that would challenge the students to think, but to do it in a fun way. Students were given a bin of solid figures and were told to create categories based on their traits. It was a very hands-on and open-ended task. Since this will help the IEP and ESOL students visualize what we are doing in class by having the figures right in front of them to see and touch. Later in the lesson, when we were writing the definitions down, I made sure to hold up what a prism would be and what a pyramid would be. This helps these children also see what the definition is saying while we are writing it down. I believe that oral language opportunities in the classroom are very important. I tend to believe that students learn more from bouncing ideas off of each other than they do from me lecturing to the whole class. This lesson that I created is very student-centered. For most of the lesson, the students are talking amongst themselves to try and figure out what categories are present in these shapes and where to sort them. They also had to come up with rules of each category. I would walk around and ask questions to the groups to get them thinking harder. Since this lesson was the start of a new unit, I took notes as I circled around the groups. My notes consisted of students who were not participating, students who were using correct mathematical language, and students who were participating but were on the completely wrong track. I revisited these notes after I gave the students the definitions on the second day of the lesson and told them to resort the figures. I then changed my notes according to who understood the definitions, who was on the right track, and who still has no idea. This will help me make groups for the following week to review in smaller groups what was taught over the past 2 days. We can make generalizations about solid figures was the objective of my lesson. After discussing this project with my mentor teacher, she handed me a worksheet on solid figures and told me to plan a 2-day lesson based off of the worksheet. The first place I looked was the Montgomery County Curriculum Guide, which did not have any kind of lesson that would suit my students. My students learn best when lessons are hands-on and when they can talk to each other. When I consulted their textbook, there were only 2 pages on solid figures. I took what the 2 pages said and then continued to search on the internet and in my classroom for ideas. I found solid figure buckets in my classroom and different lessons online which I combined all into one that would suit my class. To make sure I knew what I was talking about, I looked up definitions of pyramids and prisms in the students' textbooks along with online and in our class textbook. I fear not knowing an answer to a question a student may ask. Therefore, I do my research before I conduct a lesson. This lesson had the ongoing assessment of sorting. Where do these solid figures belong? What are the rules for each category? Some of the questions I asked the students was where they saw these solid figures in their homes. This got them excited and the discussions flowing. As I listened to what the children were discussing, I noticed a common misconception. The misconception was the term vertices. We have not discussed what this is in class yet, but the students were using the word in the wrong context. I made note of this and will make sure to create a meaningful lesson when we get to that chapter. The students had to use their creativity and critical thinking skills throughout the lesson. They had to look at all the solid figures, figure out what figures were alike and different, and then categorize them. They also had to write precise rules for each group, which a lot of them struggled with. After the students created their groups, I gave each group 3 more solid figures and told them to place them in categories they created based off of their rules. This allowed the students to go back and reread their rules and place the figures in the correct categories. Some of them even had to change the wording of their rules around. Lastly, communication and collaboration was very present in my lesson. The students had to work together to overcome differences of opinions when sorting the figures and deciding how to word the rules. Some of the groups struggled with this part of the content. I had to remind one group a few times to work together and include everyone's opinion in their final sorting and their rules. Some of my big questions of this lesson were: what are solid figures, what are pyramids and prisms, and can we sort solid figures into categories of prisms and pyramids? I began the lesson with asking the students where they found solid figures in their homes. I told them the solid figures are 3D figures, but we are using the adult term, which is solid figures. The first question got the students talking. My students love talking about themselves and their lives outside of school, so I knew this question would work. And it did. Having the students talk at the beginning of the lesson was a good warm-up for what was about to come, talking with their groups and working together for the rest of the period. This warm-up question will also help the students make connections with what we are learning in the classroom to their outside world. When those connections are made, learning is successful. The students enjoyed looking at the solid figures and discussing their characteristics with each other. It was fun for me to see how each student described each figure differently, which helped them come up with a definition and rule for each one. My Explorer helped the children take charge of their learning and make sense of mathematics in their own way using their own terms. I would walk around and probe the group with questions I had prepared and ones I made up on the spot to help extend their mathematical ideas and use correct mathematical language. I used multiple methods of assessment to engage the students in their growth in mathematics and to help monitor their learning process along with help to plan later instruction. On the first day of the lesson, I had a completely hands-on lesson with the small task of writing the rules down. The gallery walk we had on the first day also helped the students get into the minds of their classmates, along with having them question what they originally thought about the solid figures and their categories. I collected their rules and looked at them to see what I would have to go over the next day when we wrote down the definitions of pyramids and prisms. On the second day, I gave the students a worksheet and their solid figures back. Before I let them work on the worksheet, I told them the definition of vertical and horizontal faces. The worksheet had the names of the figures on it, and they had to figure out the number of vertical and horizontal faces on each figure. They had to come up with the definition and rule for prisms and pyramids on their own, which I went over at the end of class. Reviewing their rules from the previous day helped me hit a few points when I gave them their definitions. I originally did not plan on collecting their rules for the sorting. However, I'm glad I made the split-second decision at the end of the lesson on day 1. I believe that this helped me create a well-rounded definition for the students based off of their ideas and language.